now we will move on to Keith Zanta, who will give us some presentation on visual pipeline creation in Blue Ocean.
Sure thing. So like Liam said, what I'm going to talk about today is just kind of going to give an overview of some semi-realistic real-world pipeline with the Blue Ocean pipeline editor. Just a spoiler, I'm cheating a little bit from Jenkins World because I'm showing you what's going to be what's out in beta now. But we'll kind of go over this and see how things work. Just really quickly, about me, I'm a senior software engineer here at CloudBees, Blue Ocean core contributor. I've been working on the pipeline editor as well for some time. You can check things out at the GitHub there. And so I guess just to kind of kick things off, what we want to talk about is, first of all, what do we want to do, with this particular pipeline? So, to sort of simulate what a real-world pipeline might look like, one of the things is it's going to have multiple components. We're going to have a Java backend sort of and a Node-based front end. We're going to have multiple tests across a couple of different popular browsers, Chrome and Firefox. We're going to look at having a QA step as well. So, in a real-world sort of situation, what happens is some sort of quality assurance gate is one of those things that they sort of give the sign off, okay, this is good or not, based on some, some actual end user testing, and then of course some kind of a deployment step. And we're going to use the visual editor to build this whole thing. So if we go ahead and just,
I just want to jump in here real quick. You don't have to rush. Just
no, I know.
Just go at your regular speed. You're like going. It's cool.
Yep. So first things first, we're going to start with an empty repository, and let's go ahead and just use Git for the time being here. So I have an empty repository that exists here. I've already set it up to use this SSH key. So once I create this, I should be prompted to go ahead and make a Jenkins file, and we'll see that here. So, typically in the creation process, if Jenkins files are found, they're automatically scanned and that sort of thing. But in this case, none exists, and so that's what we're gonna go ahead and do today. So let's go and click the Create Pipeline button, and once we're there, you're basically presented with an empty pipeline. And so starting off, we don't actually have anything that's valid. If we go ahead and try to save this right now, we should see, there are some validation errors. So we need to do some things to fix this. So first things first, we've got to add a stage. And we're going to have a bunch of different stages. But the first stage, I think we're going to call a server. So we're going to build something on the server. And this is going to need some sort of steps to it. So let's give it some kind of a step. Let's see. And just to sort of show a few different things here. I'm going to actually run a Maven command. And so that's thing number one. Now, to get the Maven command to work, we, basically what we need is some sort of a container to, that has Maven in it. So we're going to add a Docker here. And we're going to take the Maven image, and so there's a particular one that I used before. So 3.5 GDK8 Slim. So we're going to basically get Maven 3.5 with GDK 8, and Slim is just kind of small. I think it's 100 megabytes or something. So let's see. And so after we do this build, we're sort of simulating a build in this particular step, and I'll show some other stuff in a minute. But after we do this, what we want to do is to stash the contents. And so what we're going to do is store basically the WAR file that's the result. So we're going to go ahead and just boudoir. Okay, so that's thing number one.
Hey, Keith, could I jump in here for just a second?
Absolutely.
If you click on the stage there, that settings part at the bottom, that's new, isn't it?
Yes, like I said, I'm cheating just a little bit. This is out in beta today,
Okay.
and will be out shortly in Blue Ocean proper. But
okay, cool. Yeah.
But again, so this is sort of what to expect. So there we go with the server. Next thing we want to do is we want to build a client. And so let's see. I have a group. I'm going to call this whole group build, right? And I want them to run in parallel. So I've just clicked the button here, and it's basically created another parallel group. I've already added something that's going to build the server, so I'm going to add something that's going to build the client in this case. So let's see. Again, we're going to do a shell script, so I'm going to paste something in here that I have. And you'll see something here as well. We've got an NPM call, and this particular thing is going to just install React from NPM. But similarly, what we want to do here is go ahead and make something that's going to make NPM available. So to do that, we're going to use a different Docker image. And this one is pretty easy. Let's see. We want to node 6. And let's see. So that's okay for now. So let's go ahead and try to save this, and hopefully it saves just fine. And we'll see how that looks when we run it. All right, so let's see what we've got. We've got a couple of different things running in parallel. We've got a client build and a server build. And let's see, so what we see with the client build is we actually have an error. So this is kind of an interesting thing. So you'll see what happens is we sort of have an issue. We can't access this .npm. And the reason for that is because we don't have the right user. So I'm running this sort of, on some system, it's creating a Docker image, but it doesn't have the right user for the client. So what we need to actually do is go into the settings here and give it the args to run as the root user. Many of these Docker images require that, and so you'll see that later. But if we give it a -u00, that'll give it the root user. So let's make sure that works, and go ahead and run that as well. And you'll see as we watch this, it actually seems to be saving all of these things that we need. And if we look at the end, we actually have a successful build here. All right, so let's go ahead and keep adding some steps to make this a bit more realistic, because right now it's building some things, but certainly not doing anything with it. So similar to the server, what we want to do is go ahead and add a stash step for the client so that we can stash a few different things as well. What we're going to do is just save all of the things in the disk directory, and we're going to use those later, but for the time being, we'll leave that. So after the build happens, we want to go ahead and do some tests. Now in this case, let's see, first test, I think we said we wanted Chrome. And let's see, so we've got another Docker image we want to set up for this guy, and so we're going to use standalone Chrome on this. We're going to go ahead and add a step. In this case, we're kind of skipping over some of these tests just for brevity, but go ahead and do that. We'll add another Firefox step. This is our testing group. Use the tester. So we'll do that, and then similarly, we're going to run this in a different Docker container. And that. Another Selenium there. All right, so again, let's go ahead and test this, make sure that things are good or we didn't mess anything up. And save that and run it. So let's see, our server build passed, of course. Client build is passing, doing some npm installs. And our other builds here are not really doing much, so of course they're passing as well. But obviously what you'd want to do is run all of your tests in parallel. But again, sort of that's we're trying to do some things for brevity's sake here. All right, so after we had all our tests passing, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. What we want to add next is a step, kind of a gateway, right? So in a real world scenario, you've got a QA team, a lot of times anyway, that their responsibility is to go and manually test things to make sure that, let's say your entire automation suite didn't miss anything obvious, or or they didn't see anything else that's broken. So what we want to do is to make this happen in such a way that we actually have a QA step, and QA is able to to sort of approve things. So let's go ahead and just make a QA stage. Okay, the first things we want to do here, because what we did back on the server and the client, if you remember, we stashed some various files, and these of course would certainly be used with the tests as well. But we stashed server files with a var, and we stashed client files with the dist directory. So what we want to do for the QA is to get all those files first. So let's go ahead and restore. We want to restore the server. And we want to restore the client as well. And the next thing, we need to take those files and go deploy them somewhere. Now, in this particular case, I think what we're going to go ahead and do is use Tomcat server. So we're going to put some script together that's going to put those files in some place that Tomcat can deal with. So in this particular thing, we're going to, if we just step back a moment, we'll use, again, a different Docker image here. And this particular one is going to be Tomcat 8. Again, what we need to do is to run everything within the Jenkins environment as the root user, because that's how the Tomcat server is set up. And the other thing we need to do is to expose a port so that we can actually see what's going on within the server. Right, so Tomcat's going to run under port 8080, and we're just going to expose it to this local port here, 11080. So going back to our steps, we have an application directory, and this is where Tomcat Web Apps is going to live. Now, for those of you familiar with Tomcat, there's a special directory, root all uppercase. And that is basically the root directory, so you don't need any context path or anything like that. So we're going to just put our client files in there. We're going to take our server files. Now, recall we've unstashed something. In this case, it was a target server var. And we're going to put that in its own server directory. And so that'll be whatever web app that is. And we're going to make a brand new root directory that we're going to dump our client files in. And what we did there was stash the dist directory. So we're going to go ahead and copy everything from the dist directory just directly into the Tomcat root. And then last but not least, with this container, we're going to just start Tomcat. So there you see, we've got something going on. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. And it's going to go through, the majority of the things that you've seen already. But we're going to have a new step here new stage at the end. It's going to be the QA stage. So let's see what we've got so far. All right, so right now it looks like everything passed, and that's good. So we got our scripts right. We got something Tomcat started, and based on all of our settings, we forwarded things to port 11.0.80. So let's see if we can access the server. Well, we can't, obviously, because it's not running anymore. It started Tomcat, destroyed the Docker image, and everything's sort of back to normal. So in this sort of situation where you've got a QA team that they sort of need to verify things before it moves on to the next stage, you can very easily use the input step to pause things and sort of get a yes or no answer. So what we're going to do after this shell script here, and keep in mind what's happening within this stage is it's all running within this Docker container. So we're going to put an input step in. And this one is going to be for the QA people. We're going to see if they need to, if they think things are okay or they're not. Okay, so let's see what happens now. Well, again, it's going to go through a build here. And we see that we've got a QA stage that it's going to get to eventually. So as soon as it gets there, you'll see that this input step has done something something interesting in this scenario. Now, the other thing that I'll say is this isn't always what you will want to do, but it's just a sort of an illustration of what's possible with pipeline. So we'll see things went blue, and somewhere or another here, we've got this wait for interactive input. We've got a go button that we added and an abort if things are bad. So what we can do, because we're paused within a stage within a Docker container essentially, you'll see that I can go ahead and go and hit this site here, and I can go and test out that exact build. And so what's happened now is that with this pipeline, I've done a build, with some kind of a client, some kind of a server. It's passed some tests that we've defined, on browsers, and it's made it to a QA stage. And this QA stage has the exact binaries that were built during the build step, because what we've done is stash them and restored them here. And so I can, at this point, let's say something is wrong, and I don't want it really to say hello here. So I'm going to go ahead and abort that. But we'll add one more step here, and you'll see, of course, it just terminated the build in that case. But we'll add one more step here that, in the case that that this was good, we want to go ahead and deploy this to some production system. So we'll add another stage here after the QA stage. Similarly, we want to restore the server and the client. And we'll add a bit of a shell script here as well. And this is sort of a, again, not one that's going to deploy to anyone in particular, because this is clearly a demo, but they'll sort of show you what it's deploying, what it's got, and then just for fun, we'll add another step that gives us a message. Now, this particular step doesn't really need to run on any particular Docker container necessarily. We could set it up to, if we have a specific shell script that we want to, to use, if we want to make sure that it's running on, Ubuntu Linux or some specific environment, we could certainly, set up a Docker image. But in this case, we don't really care too much. So let's go ahead and save this. And things aren't going to be a lot different from the last time. We'll see here we don't have anything running in our QA Docker container. At the moment, we've got to wait for a build to happen, and we've got to wait for the tests to happen, and that sort of thing as well. And just while it's going on, you can see, I've already pulled these Docker containers, so this is going pretty quickly. But if this was the first time, it would go ahead and do that. You'll see the shell scripts are giving us the things we expect. We've got a Maven 3, in this particular Maven container. We've got a node in this particular container. We had a successful install of React in this case. Again, things have passed our tests that we've defined, and we're sitting in a QA stage. So going back here, well, we certainly still have this thing running, and a QA person could decide, hey, maybe we want to go and promote this to staging. So that's what we can do from here, or abort it. In the case we abort, let's just do that for now. Obviously, things failed, and it didn't reach the deployment step in that case. But let's rerun that. And luckily, we didn't have a very long test suite. So here we are again. In this case, QA will go and look over here and say, okay, this is good. Whatever changes were introduced, I don't see any problems, and I want to promote that. So, once they click the OK button, basically, the pipeline will go ahead and proceed. And maybe, in an actual real world scenario, you don't deploy immediately to production. Maybe there's a staging where you have a copy of your real data if you're running a SaaS or something like that. But in our small example here, basically we've been able to build a couple of different components, run them through testing in parallel, stop at a QA stage to see, to make sure to verify that our build is good, and let the business essentially decide that it's time to go to production. And so you'll see here basically what we've deployed. We've again stashed the exact contents of the builds between the client and the server in this pipeline, and we've deployed the client JS, index HTML, and server WAR, which don't really have anything in this example, but that's sort of what we're looking at. So
that's great, Keith. So that's the like a real world example. Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. So of course, in the real world, you'd also be putting commit messages into each of those changes, right?
Right. Well, I was just actually that's a good point.
I'm just kidding. I'm just giving you grief. It's okay. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Exactly. So I'm editing the Jenkins file, not really the code so much, but absolutely, yeah, I would tell what I'm doing there for sure.
Right. Exactly. And this is a beta version of Blue Ocean, like you were saying. When can we expect this to go into the main release channel? This is really great.
Yeah, so this is definitely going to be out in the 1.3 release, which is imminent. But I can't promise any dates or anything like that. But sure. I would say within the next few weeks, you would definitely see that in the mainstream.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure thing.